Hello, welcome. This is another episode of Can I just do that for the rest of the episode? Just to annoy you guys. Like, this was a very interesting time that I thought that I was thinking, is it still okay to say Black Friday, or is that stepping on some people's toes? I don't know, because every so-called community, every group has marked out words, alphabets for themselves, abbreviations, slogans, and I feel very soon we're going to run out of alphabets or words, a combination of these things, and we'll have to soon invent formulas like what Mr. Elon Musk is naming his children's with. Children's, my God, that's a great way to start the podcast, you fucking illiterate. Naming his children, plural apostrophe S. That's what I meant, just to make sure that you guys don't think I'm unworthy to listen to. But his children's names, or child's names, that's even worse. Yes, he's using formulas. For a second, I got very, very terrified that I had fucked up. But no, children, apostrophe S, names. We use, I think someone I read somewhere. But it's a bit baffling to me, because one side, I read somewhere that Katy Perry got sued. And many people are like, wow, finally, for plagiarizing. But she got sued by someone else, and I don't know the lawsuit. I read a little bit about it from what knowledge or what information was available to me on The Guardian, which is, of course, the most independent source of journalism. But I think they're good. So they claimed that this Christian group, or this guy who was a Christian, who's a singer, I don't know, a Christian singer or a singer who's Christian, I don't know. But he claimed that one of his songs was used, or rather Katy Perry used one of his songs, one of the riffs or the templates. And that's that whole conversation, right? If you use the same notes, are you copying? I don't know. I'm not a musician. At least I'm trying to, but I'm not a very good musician. But this goes down that rabbit hole. You can't use alphabets, you can't use things. And I think there is a certain creation within a framework which music and language help us express ourselves. You have a bunch of notes, a bunch of rules, how those notes apply, and how those various things fall into place with timing, with signatures, key signatures, with major, minor scales, and the same thing with language. And as a result, we communicate, we create, we have a beauty in language. We have a beauty in the rules of language that govern language, that determine the way we interact. And that's similar with music or with various other forms of expression. But now if you go and say, no, you can't say that because I'm offended, or these words don't apply to me, where do we take it from there? Anyhow, Black Friday, that's, of course, if you're in America, you probably are completely shagged out right now after waiting in lines. And I don't know how it worked. I didn't read up about how people, because usually people, like, they're flocked around the mall, or they're just like waiting in queues around the thing for the first thing. And it's a feeding frenzy, because they want all the best deals that are available, the best suits that have come from Vietnam, which cost $1 to make anyway. But now Hugo Boss said it's $2,000, but they're giving it for $100. You're just fucking blown away. And of course, we have Black Friday in India now, because of course we're just following the consumerism. We're following the patterns that are happening in the US, as always, even though, we're fucking celebrating Thanksgiving. It's a bit much, right? Who are we thanking, and who are we giving, and what have we taken? Because clearly shit has been taken from us, which we're a little oblivious to. But sometimes when Shashi Tharoor reminds us, we're like, oh, fucking big word, man. Please tell us what we've lost and our legacy. And that's when people from small towns in India, like, fucking English, hate the language, we are proud of India, national pride, we should speak regional. Good for you, speak regional, but I don't think don't blame a language. I think I understand it's sensitive. When I spoke to the interculturalist, she told me, yes, language is the first thing that they mock to make you feel that you're not good enough as a culture. I get it, but don't hate on one thing just because you can't speak it. Secondly, don't hate on something because someone who spoke that language fucked us over. Yes, was it bad? I suppose so. Was I alive then? Nah, I hope not. Maybe in my previous life. Yes, but there are certain things that happen when... where was I going with this thought? I was going somewhere with this thought. But yeah, various things happen when language... And I don't want to just ramble while I think of what I was going to say. But there's this idea that we take things without understanding why they're being done. And I think that's happening, and people say cultural appropriation if some white person or black person or Mexican, I don't know what color Mexicans are brown as well, it's a brown person, or maybe they're lighter brown, or maybe they're beige, and they let out fireworks. People are like, that's Diwali. How could you take our thing? But we are happy to say Thanksgiving, even though we don't understand why the fuck we're doing it, even though it's giving thanks to the people that you basically said, excuse me, we know this is your land, but you can fuck off and you can live in the outhouse and we'll supply you with enough stuff to sort of put blinders on you so you don't know. And yeah, as a result, once a year, we'll give you some shit and make you feel like, oh, cool. I'm reading this book, and as a result, I'm kind of slowly, I'm not saying that's where my entire education about the topic comes from, but it's a book called The Night Watchman, and it's about the Native American tribe in North Dakota and how they are fighting against this particular bill of displacement, which doesn't recognize them as Native Americans anymore, but as regular Americans. And many people are like, well, what's the problem there? But in the book, they're like, yeah, that takes away our entire I mean, I wouldn't say identity, that they do say identity, but it's this thing that they claim that reservation is not healthy and they want to just basically profit from the land. And these guys say this is the way we live, and this is the way we live as a group of people, as a tribe. And they are really a tribe. So you can't just say, like how we say community of disabled people. That's not a community. It's a group of people who have certain physical, mental, emotional issues that can connect with each other because of certain adversities or the way they face life, but they're very different in other aspects. But here, predominantly, they come from a certain lineage, a certain ancestry, certain cultural context. They come from families that have lived together for thousands of years, and they come from the same region. So they have more in common than, say, sexual preference, what they eat, or whether they're disabled or not. So that is this whole conversation we're having nowadays, a community, not community. And of course, there is so much out there, man. It just, once you start, it's just a can of worms, right? Like if I say, are black people a community? They're a race of people. Are they a community? There are sub-communities. Similarly, you can't just make blanket statements saying the disabled community, because it's just weird. And anyhow, so my thing was Black Friday. Are we allowed to say it? And as in India, like you see sales anywhere. And the reason I'm really pissed off is because I fell for one of these Black Friday deals in Bangalore. So I am as much to blame as the people who stole the land from the Native Americans. I don't know how I made that connection, but that connection does exist. Anyhow, the reason I also speak about disabilities, today's World Disability Day, or the Disabled World Day, or the Day for World Disables, or the day where everything's disabled, so nothing works. You can apply it in whichever way you want, but I suppose the main thing is people using this day as a platform to spread awareness about disability, about the various needs of people with disabilities, about the various shortcomings in society for people with disabilities, about the lack of access, the lack of awareness, and the lack of inclusion, and various situations that lead to people not living a dignified life, especially people who have a disability, and to spread this sense of dignity for people who don't have access to things which are so-called perceived as normal ways of living. So I salute the people who are working in this space, who are trying to help people who are disabled, who have fought for a better way to live and for a more dignified way of living for themselves and people around them. And I think whoever on a governance level, in the government level, who has helped with policy, it's an uphill battle, and it really is just more symbolic as opposed to many of the grassroots projects that are actually doing work. But I still salute you. So before, this is not a joke thing, but yeah, I think the day itself is good because it draws attention, and I suppose there are a lot of good people doing great work. But in general, the days themselves, I think you just sort of, today, what is it? Today is World Friendship Day. Tomorrow is Collecting Pink Pens Day, and the World Making Graphite Pencils Sustainable Day, and next thing, World Disability Day. Like, so we don't know what has which day has more gravitas than the other day, and which day has to be taken more seriously. Because some people out there might have purple pens and they really fucking are craving a pink pen. But that day might be important to them. So I'm not really taking away from any of your days. But I think it's important to have dialogue in these situations. When it comes to community, I suppose if you feel like a community, I'm not taking away from that at all. I think, hats off to you if you feel where you're accepted, and if you can feel a sense of safety where your fears, your sense of belonging, or more importantly, if you have this vulnerability which you feel is being exploited, but you can go away from that into a place where people will protect your interests and give you a sense of what you can do with who you are. I think that's great. A community is supposed to do that. But if it takes away your complexity and the beauty of the elements that go into making you who you are, and kind of take you for just that one particular trait, as I've spoken before on this podcast, I think just for you as a person, and me as a person, I'm not just pointing fingers, I think I wouldn't like that, because I don't think a community is supposed to take away multiple aspects of people and just use one to build up into this particular cause, but to grow and use the strengths of everyone and also identify the weaknesses of everyone and make this community, which is not perfect, but not entirely flawed. It's this organism that goes towards creating a better way of life for everyone involved. Yeah, so I said that. So on that note, happy World Disability Day, or happy Disabled Toilets Day, or happy Disabled. Everything should be disabled on World Disabled Day. And I think everyone should just sort of pretend that, I wouldn't say nothing works, because disabled people work rather well. I just want to understand. Would I ask everyone to say, cover your eyes and pretend you're blind today? That's fucking ridiculous. Some people do that though. Empathize with us. Oh, shut the fuck up. It's not going to work like that. But being sensitive, I think, is important. Being kind, I think, doesn't hurt anyone. Yeah. But as you will find out very soon, I'm doing something different again on this podcast. I'm marrying two ideas. Just like how I speak and I talk shit on my own, I'm going to continue to do that. But you don't have to wait to hear the interviews as well, guys. Well, what am I trying to say? Well, a lot of times on the podcast, I try to take a step back and figure out what I'm trying to say. But I am going to give you both in one experience. What you're hearing now, where I shit on people, and not people. Come on, Sandeep. You don't shit on all people. Not all people, but people who do stupid things, and certain stupid things that bother me. And I will bring an interview, which I also do, as you may know when you've heard this podcast. But instead of you waiting for one on Tuesday and one on Friday, you get both on the same day. Isn't that genius? Yeah. Why did it take you so long to figure this shit out? I don't know. I didn't think I could do it, because I just felt there were two parts of my life which were so different. There were two avenues which I was going down, which were in different directions. And I felt that somewhere that I had to make peace with myself for these two to meet at a crossroads that can come together on one episode of this podcast called the SoapyRao Show. So that is what is happening. And you, my friend right now who's listening, are witness to this momentous occasion where two great ideas get married. Just have to say it myself. But anyhow, I do have a lovely guest on today's episode. This recording was done, as all recordings, online, but it was done a few days back. So I don't know why I need to fucking say that, because there's no video. It might pop up. There's no video. Why do you have to go? Oh, good Lord, you spilled the beans. Yeah, but it's okay. I'm honest on this podcast. But anyway, this recording was done a few days back with a lovely lady who lives, I think, Cape Cod, somewhere in not in New Hampshire. She's in Massachusetts, which I'm not going to spell in the description because it's a hard word. Her name is Becky Kekula, and when the interview starts, you will hear me saying her name with extreme care, because I was nervous. I didn't know how to say it properly, and I don't like messing up someone's name, because it's nice to get someone's names right. Not their pronoun so much, but their name. So her name is Becky Kekula, and you will hear me say it with utmost care, because I wanted to get it right. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Becky's a fantastic person. You'll hear about her story, about how she perceives the world and how the world perceives her, and a lot of the things that still need to be addressed. A lot of mean people out there, a lot of people who are just, I think they hate themselves, so as a result they want to hate you, make you feel less than worthy. They want to put you down because they see you as someone who's a threat to them, and you being happy as something that they can't be, so why should you be? And many of these things which are, I find, injustice, because it's more It's not something you can take to the court of law or something you want to make a big deal about on through an activism program, but it's just an individual thing. When they can't find happiness and look at themselves for who they are with everything and their entirety of good and bad and happy and sad, then when they look at someone with a disability or someone who's living a life which is not so-called normal, in a body that's so-called normal, they can't handle it. They can't handle seeing them or seeing you happy. So they feel that they need to bring you down, as opposed to them looking at you going, man, I need to use that person's strength as an example of what I can be. And Becky is one example of a person who gives a lot of courage to people, a lot of strength and a lot of hope, just by being the person she is and living the life that she is. So do enjoy the conversation. I really hope you'd enjoy I think you will enjoy the conversation. I don't think you have to hope for it. I don't have to hope for it. But I do listen through, and all the details for Becky and the work she does are in the description. So hope you enjoy it. And thanks for listening as always. Do tell a friend, and catch you on the other side. Cheers. Becky Kekula, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. And how are you?
I'm good. Sorry for that pause. I think I might have looked constipated when I got your last name because I didn't want to mess it up. So Becky Kekula, that's a really cool name. So thank you so much for doing this and joining me on the podcast. And where are you from? Like, your name doesn't sound like a traditional, I don't know what a traditional American name is, but are you from, you said Massachusetts, but is that where you were born and brought up?
So my maiden name is Curran, and I am from Massachusetts, and we're half Irish, half Italian. And my husband, who gave me the name Kekula, is part of a hodgepodge of different backgrounds, but I think a majority of it is Czechoslovakian, even though it sounds very Hawaiian.
I was going to say it. I mean, I've never been to Hawaii, but I thought it was Hawaii, and I was like, oh, okay, this sounds like a very interesting. It's a Czech last name. Interesting. Okay, so that's cool. And so we got in touch through the group, which is of course on Facebook, where the Diversibility group, right? And we've been in touch through that. And okay, for the people who don't know, and I don't want to mess up any terminology, anything which I'm not 100% sure about. So could you explain to people what your story is in the sense where you come from, with the fact that you're living with this particular, how do you put it? What's the word you use?
That's a great question. I have dwarfism, meaning that I'm 4 feet tall as an adult. So I have an average height torso and shorter arms and legs.
Okay.
Dwarfism is considered a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990. The definition is a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more of life's major activities. And it requires some accommodations, being a person living with dwarfism in a world that wasn't made for us. And I have proudly kind of attached my identity to the word disability, because I don't think it's something we should run away from. I think it's something we should embrace, and it's just a part of life. We may not do things the traditional way that other people do things, or what one may consider as normal, but is normal really a thing?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It just may take us a little bit more time to do a task that requires a lot of extra physical activity, but we still find a way to get it done. Living a life in this body has allowed me to problem solve more than most people, just trying to figure out, if I show up somewhere and everything's really high, how am I going to find ways to adapt? And I grew up in a family with no history of dwarfism, so it was really trial and error, trying to all figure out how to make me feel as comfortable as possible in a world that wasn't quite made for people like me.
Okay. I'm sorry that I asked you to explain it, because the thing is, it's not that I'm trying to be politically correct. It's just that I don't want to say the words that sound insensitive in any way, because I'll be honest with you, because the thing with height is such a big thing in cultures, right? Especially being in India. A lot of times you hear people mocking people, or rather not even maybe to hurt them, but very loosely using height-based nicknames to call someone who's short or tall, right? So,
Right.
and you kind of never, and when you think of disability, you think of more severe. I wouldn't say severe, but you think of more sort of quadriplegic. You think of people who have cerebral palsy, people who've got a cane. So the thing is, height or color. These things are seen more as physical traits as opposed to a disability or an ability. So I'm so glad you explained this just to start this conversation, because it first of all just gives me a lot of I think I have a lot of questions to ask. Like, for instance, is this something which, as you said, no one in your family has it? So when you were young, when you were growing up as a child, did you have a normal, as you said, normal, but what? No, not normal, but did you have a child, the growth sort of phase of a child, and did it sort of manifest later?
I would say probably when I was in kindergarten, when people were around me, I felt like I was still around the same height of most people. But
Okay.
kind of after that, once we got to the elementary school, people started growing taller a lot faster. So I
Okay.
kind of had a slow and steady growth process and
Mm,
finished growing around 50, there's 13 or 14.
mm,
And I did have to have leg surgery when I was technically finished growing, just to put support back in my legs that was taken out when I was 3 years old, because I was bow-legged and it
okay.
was affecting the alignment of my body. And they really assessed to figure out when was the best time to put bone back in my legs, and it was around the time when I had stopped growing. But it kind of just differs for different people.
Mm.
Some people, it may take a little longer for that to happen. And you're surrounded by people who are all different heights anyways, based on their family history
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
background.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say height is such a relative thing, geographically, culturally. It just doesn't. It's something which shouldn't be a point to ostracize or mock someone for, right?
Right. And it was funny because as I got older, of course it's going to take me longer to walk places with shorter legs, and my friends who were on the taller side were those who would wait up for me if
Mm.
everyone else was walking too fast. And I think it's kind of a different but similar feeling that people
Yeah,
who are extremely tall have,
yeah.
feeling a little left out of the crowd of those average height folks.
Yeah,
And
I think this normal needs to be, first of all, addressed, right? Because there's this group in the
yeah.
middle sitting at a certain height, which is sort of now become the norm, or the way, accepted way in looks or in clothing or in design and architecture. And yeah, because I have a friend who's, quite, I mean, for an Indian, he's quite tall. He's about 6'3", and I think that's tall anyway. But he hates coming home because he keeps banging his head against the door. And he's like, man, you guys are so insensitive in your house. I'm like, never thought it's a problem.
Right,
But,
exactly. So
but
we all face different challenges. But going
absolutely.
back to kind of what you were saying about where our mind goes with the word disability, in
Yeah.
the little people community, there are over 400 types of dwarfism. I have the most
Yeah.
common type called achondroplasia. I would say a majority of people who have my type of dwarfism with fewer complications than others may have, or it's not obvious that we use any mobile devices to get around, because there could be
Mm,
crossover. There could be a person with dwarfism who uses a wheelchair.
right.
There's a big divide in who
Yeah.
identifies as having a disability or not. And
Yeah.
the society kind of goes at that same thing, like what's your disability? And because there are so few of us,
Mm.
only 30,000 in the United States and a few 100,000 worldwide, there's no
That's a
other
really
category for
small
us to really
number.
fit into.
That's a really
Yeah.
small number. So the thing is, we tend to do this. I mean, people tend to use this sort of broad brushstroke and just say dwarfism. But I'm glad you pointed this out, because I was a little confused. Like for instance, with visual impairment or blindness, there are certain genetic causes. There are certain superficial lifestyle condition, accidents could cause blindness or visual. So in your case, do they know? So you mentioned the condition of dwarfism that you have. So why does like something like that happen to a human body? Like, is it the environment that triggers it? Is it a certain gene that acts up? So
Mhm.
what
It's
happened?
an alteration of one chromosome.
Okay.
So it's very specific. So
Right.
when two parents, uh, now you can find out through genetic testing.
I was asking because I just had a similar experience a few years back and more recently with identifying which gene, rather within the gene, which mutation, which exon, which I just found out as a word, causes my eye condition now. So I'm very interested to find out how specific, is it a gene or within a gene? Is it a protein? Is it a thing? And I mean, I'm sounding a little like a geneticist, which I'm not, but which one is responsible, and are you able to identify and isolate which one is causing that in your condition?
Yeah, so it's like FGR. It's like one that's it's just one alteration of like one letter in the gene in the chromosome.
Oh
So
man,
it's like
that's,
very specific.
yeah, it's so
And
painful to hear. One letter, that's it, right?
yes,
Yeah.
and I know this really well because I myself now am a mother of a child with dwarfism. So
So your
we
child
did,
has dwarfism?
yes.
So
Uh,
the copy was passed on from you to your child.
Yes, and my
Okay.
husband also has dwarfism. So there was a
Okay. So
50% chance of my child having what we have.
so the thing is, I mean, I'm sorry if I'm if it's getting too personal. Please do let me know.
No,
Right?
it's
No, because your husband and you both have the same kind of dwarfism,
yes.
and as a result, you both have that mutation or that anomaly in that gene. But
Yes.
was there a chance of you having a child without dwarfism?
Yes, 25% chance.
Okay, because of that one healthy copy which you or your husband could pass on, which would kind of
Mhm.
negate that. Okay. So,
And then
okay.
there's the opposite as well. If we both passed on the dwarfism gene, the dominant gene,
Hmm.
the child, this is 25% chance where the child wouldn't likely make it past a few days after being born,
Oh, because
because
of,
of double
okay.
dominant is what they're called. So our child has
Oh.
achondroplasia, so they fall into kind of that 50% chance bucket.
So your child, how old is he or she? Sorry, I don't know.
He's 3 months old.
Oh, lovely! Congratulations. That's so
Thank
cool.
you.
You're a new mother, and you took the time to do this podcast. Really appreciate that. So he's 3 months, and okay. Let me ask. You said you have the torso of an average person, right? And does that mean all your organs, all that are okay? I don't use this word, but I can't think of another other word. But are they the size of a normal average person?
Yes, they
Okay.
are. But I will say, even though my torso appears to be the same height and same size,
Hmm.
the organs are more compact because they're
Okay.
still trying to fit into a smaller body.
Ah, okay. Now I have a friend who's a comedian from, I think he's originally from Lebanon. Now I don't know if he lives in Australia or in England. I met him. It's been about 7 years. His name is Iman Hachidi, and he's. You said you're 4 feet. I think he's even less. And I don't know what condition his is, but his voice, you can from his voice tell that he. I don't know what's the word, whether he's of a smaller size, and he's got like I can't see you very clearly, but he's pretty much like, is the right word, little person?
Yes.
Right. So it's interesting because he tells me, I mean, he told me when we spoke, he said, yeah, I can't, my endurance, my stamina, I can't do as much. My days are, I get tired a lot more easily. And is that common occurrences, common traits that a lot of people with dwarfism face?
I think so, just because of the energy that it takes to do simple tasks may take us more energy.
Hmm.
It kind of ebbs and flows. It's like what works for you, or how much can you, I think we all kind of assess our bodies and what we can handle or not.
Hmm.
But there may be other times where we have a ton of energy and don't get as tired.
So, are you in any kind of constant, like, sort of, do you have chronic pain? Do you have chronic sort of inflammation? Do you have chronic?
I do
Uh,
not, but I
okay.
did have major back surgery when I was 15 because of the compact organ piece of things. My spinal column goes up really close to my spinal cord, and I had lost my ability to walk and had to have surgery for intervention. So sometimes just the soreness from that,
Mm.
it was 22 years ago when I had that surgery.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I have to just take a break. And
Right.
if I experience numbness in my legs, sometimes that is a little bit of a sign of that compression still happening.
Mm.
And I just have to be careful. But I've always been fortunate to have a high pain tolerance. So
I like how you
I
look at
guess,
it like that. You don't look at it like, oh man, it sucks. But as opposed to that, I've built up a good pain tolerance. I love that.
yeah. So sometimes it's scary because I may think that everything's okay and
Yeah.
maybe there is something going on. And even that
Yeah.
happened with my recent surgery for having my child.
Hmm.
Because my body's so small, I did have to have a C-section,
Of course.
and I
Yeah.
did general anesthesia. So they put me to sleep because there
Oh,
were just too many risks to staying awake and having something put in my back to alleviate the pain. But
that's
I
the
feel like
epidural, right? Right. Yeah.
it went so well.
Yeah.
I worried that, like, am I in pain or am I not in pain? So I still had some of the medicine just while I was still in the hospital, but I really didn't do too much differently when I got home because I didn't
Hmm.
find a need to just have pain medication just because.
Hmm. No, it's amazing. I'm so, it's so amazing to hear the way you talk about everything you deal with. How is it, when, I think from what you just said, I think we're about the same age. I was born in 1982, so I think we're around the same sort of era we grew up in different parts of the world. But uh, how was, for you in your environment in a place like Massachusetts with your family? How is the social the social awareness or the social outlook towards you as a child in school, the sort of support structure, the was there any kind of ridicule that you faced, or any kind of did you face rejection at all?
I was really fortunate that my mother taught in the middle school where I attended, and just
Mm-hmm.
because of that, it was in our hometown, and she was well respected throughout the district.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that brought some advanced awareness
Mm-hmm.
before I
Mm-hmm.
was entering my school years.
Okay,
One
that
thing
helps.
that
Yeah.
was really beneficial was my parents worked together with another family. I had gone to preschool with someone who was able to be in my class from preschool to seventh grade, where it
Ah.
would just seemed when they tell you who's in your class, it just seemed like a coincidence. As
Mm.
young children, we didn't really figure or
That your parents
think
had
about,
planned
like,
this.
oh, our parents set it up.
Yeah.
But it really helped having someone be like an ally and support to me for those years.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
we ultimately got separated in seventh grade because that's when they started dividing different homerooms into last name, and it wouldn't have been as much of a secret, but
Yeah.
I just thought it felt very organic, and it was nice to have someone who knew me in my class every year.
I think that's a bit
And
of a reassuring, like a security blanket, right? You know that you have this
exactly.
person to lean on. And I'm
And
sure even they
that
had that sense that I have you, that they had you to sort of think you had this team that you were sort of going through high school with.
exactly. And then that allowed me to meet a whole group of friends who were her friends. Kind of, we all came together and were very close during those earlier years. But I will say that once I got to high school, it was a little more challenging because my friends started dating and they
Mm,
didn't really think that I could be around because that I wasn't really suited for that because there weren't other people with dwarfism at our school. And there's a
mm.
general assumption that
Yeah.
we only are with, but it was never this is my only preference, but
Mm,
it's kind of the society views they put on you. So those
yeah.
were a few challenging years. It was actually right after my back surgery. I had missed
Mm,
school, and everyone was super supportive during that. And then right after, I just wasn't getting invited out places as much, and
mm.
definitely dealt with
You
some
know,
hard times trying to fit in.
it's definitely difficult because, this is something I've spoken to people who are blind, and including myself. I don't think anyone intentionally wants to sort of leave you out, but maybe sometimes it's misplaced concern or sort of a misconceived notion that, oh no, they won't enjoy this. But You kind of have to work that much harder to fit in. And I think that's especially in that age when dating or trying to attract the opposite sex or fit into your classmates who are doing, adolescent things. And in my case, I was really upset that I wasn't taken when these guys were going for car rides or a sport. And I was like, man, it really I remember this one incident which was really sort of took a heavy load on my mind, and I was really upset. And not at all similar to you, but the emotion was felt like a huge sense of rejection and a huge sense of I'm not the same. But you sound like
I just want to
someone.
stop you for a second.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a time where someone said that same thing, not as similar to you. And I like to try to stop people in their tracks and say, a challenge is a challenge, an experience is an experience. And I think that's sometimes what happens. People assume like, I face all these challenges and nothing's as bad as what I have to face. But there's something about just acknowledging facing a challenge, and maybe I was equipped to deal with more challenges in different ways, and other people were as well. So I always kind of bring that up because
No, absolutely.
I don't want people to underweigh their challenges.
No, what I meant by not similar to yours, I think it's the scenario which was different. Of course, I think each person, I think I salute everyone for facing their demons and their challenges, and I think that's really well put by you. Thanks for doing that. But no, what I want to talk about is this idea now that, and just to sort of end that point, is you seem like someone who did go through those challenges. You did face those emotions which were not always pleasant, but you come out stronger for it. But do you sense, like, in today's day and age, with this entire movement we have, and I think it's great, there's a lot of awareness with the inclusion diversity movement, for a lot of people who didn't have a voice earlier. I want to say that up top before anyone gets upset, right? But there's a lot of people now saying that if you, and I don't know if it's a particular group, but with especially what I hear in the mainstream media happening in America with a lot of the LGBTQ, trans, all these communities, or they call themselves communities, is that, say, for instance, you just said, and this is something which we both can relate to, right? Where a person with dwarfism can date a person who's not someone who's got dwarfism, or someone who's visually impaired can date someone who's completely visually fine. The thing is that now there's a conversation that if you aren't attracted to a person who's a transgender, you could be called out and cancelled, or whatever these words are right now. What is your thought? What are your thoughts on that? And do you have an opinion, or maybe am I reading the situation wrong or getting the wrong information?
I guess I know more about kind of just the reactions to the disability community.
Yeah, yeah.
So not as much about what's going on there, but I think there's definitely a lot of rejection that still happens when it comes to just even interacting with the disability community, when it comes to just the actions that we're taking towards diversity and inclusion. People constantly focus on gender and people of color, and maybe they'll tackle LGBTQIA issues, but disability tends to fall off. I think it's very upsetting for someone to be able to get away with rejecting someone from the disability community or the LGBTQIA. I think we face a lot of similar obstacles where
Okay, so you feel it is similar. Okay, because the thing is that there are a few people right now, I think, doing some great work in India with diversity inclusion, and these are people who've been doing it for the past 20 years, right? And we're much larger in population, and there's a lot of social divide. And you can imagine with our kind of the entire the disparity in wealth, it's just a shocking situation, of course. And I don't go down that path, because it's a very treacherous path, because there's so much to do, and the work is just, it feels like a little drop in an ocean, But what I don't get is this sense, right? Like, because for me, the thing with dating was I had to make that much more of an effort to hide the fact that I can't make eye contact, right? I would do certain things, but for you, it's more physically evident, right? It's you are physically appear different from a person who's not got dwarfism. So do you try that much harder to say, hey, wait a second, I can do everything you can do, we can be compatible? How do you approach I'm so glad that you have a partner, you have a family, and I'm so glad it worked out. But I'm sure there were days when you were like, I don't like who I am, or I don't like people for looking at me the way they do. What was your thought process and the mindset? And again, if it gets too personal, please let me know, you know?
Well, I think definitely even in my high school years before I was involved with Little People of America, so I didn't really know any other people, little people. So I
Mm,
pretty much thought, okay, let's figure out how I can uh, just go the traditional route, and even
yeah,
it's okay.
yeah.
I can be attracted to someone who's average height, but hopefully they could be attracted back in a genuine way.
Hmm.
I would say the biggest kind of preventer of all of that experience was them, even if they had any bit of attraction, genuine attraction towards me,
Hmm.
the fear of what other people would think, how other people would judge them, their friends, saying comments. And I think even during your high school years, you're just not old enough to really feel confident to stick up for yourself for
Mm,
something that you may really want and think is important. So I think
yeah.
that was kind of a barrier to any potential connections that could have happened during those years.
Mm,
And it took until once I got to college and I joined the organization Little People of America and started meeting people with similar lived experiences that I found that connection and genuine back and forth.
it's
But
amazing that
it
they
was
have, yeah.
it's a lot of people are fearful of what others will think. And as far as me saying, oh, I can do this, I think it's hard. It's a little bit easier to do that, like for a professional setting of a job, be like, I can really do this. But
Yeah.
if someone's not feeling it in a relationship side of things, it's a little more challenging to
Mm.
build your case after the
Yeah.
fact.
You know, I find that amazing because my wife is sighted. She has no visual impairment. So I'm just trying to think, like, it's so amazing that, you know, I mean, for other reasons that she settled for me, right? Not my visual impairment, but for other things. But um, it's amazing how what people think of you can determine your entire life. Like, you know, I'm not saying,
Yeah.
and in this case, of course, but if you are with someone who has a disability, but in any aspect, like you have people who are, say, two so-called normal people being together, you think that, I mean, you and I being disabled think that, oh, they're normal, they must be happy, but you'd be, I mean, just by living how many of years I've lived on this planet, you can tell immediately, like, no, they're not that happy. If you actually just look a little beyond the surface, they still are as bogged down by social conditioning, or by how they're perceived, or how they have to be accepted, how they have to impress people, how they have to get validation. So these things, and you know what I feel by nowadays, now it's the opposite, right? If you don't celebrate, you know, whatever the new extremely sort of vocal topics are, you know, on the world stage, you have to be forced to be inclusive, you have to force people to be tolerant, you have to force people, and after a point I'm like, you know, if you do this, it's great, maybe for a few who will say, wait a second, it's kind of like the blindfolds taken off my eye. But for every one of those, I feel it's creating some people who are like, you know what, I'm going to be seen doing this because it's the way that people will accept me, but I don't feel these things. And I think that's where maybe the problem is. And do you have experience with any of these situations where people say the right things, they use the right political words, the correctness, but deep down in their sort of in their heart, they don't feel that the society should be inclusive, that not all people deserve the same dignity to live?
Absolutely. And we hear it even in our family circles of people who knew me growing up. And
Hmm.
especially, I think, especially when it comes to terminology and what we find acceptable, there's a saying that people often use in the disability community, nothing about us without us. So society may try to project how we like to be referred to, and it could be completely opposite. And
Hmm.
I could have a completely opposite point of view as the person next to me with dwarfism, because maybe they had a different lived experience growing up and their
Yeah.
terminologies that they don't prefer to hear. And for me, maybe there's something else that I prefer to hear. And it's very challenging because we're all trying to advocate for greater acceptance, but then some
Mm.
people may feel that one term works better than the other. I would prefer if everyone just calls people by their name and get to know them that way. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think there's a ongoing assumption, even when it comes to workplace inclusion,
Yeah.
the ability for someone to do a job. I think society, and even the ability for someone with a disability to be high up in an organization. If someone has a disability that you are not able to figure out right away by looking at them,
Mm.
not apparent, then they're less likely to make it known because they see how people with physical disabilities are treated in society and the doubt that's
Mm.
projected on them.
That's so true, and I'm a living example of that, where I'm not outwardly disabled, right? Maybe if you look at me for a few more moments than a passing glimpse, you'll say, okay, this guy's either got a squint or he's not able to focus, but I literally for years just try to take all the attention away from my eyes. I would do anything to appear normal, and it's such a huge burden and almost like a huge lie to live with, right? Because you don't want to trip and fall, because people are like, why can't you? And if people say, what happened to your eyes? Why, if you look too close at a television screen or a thing, like, why are you looking so close? And you kind of almost terrified to say out loud that I do have a visual impairment, And the thing, what you just mentioned is so true, because people, I think we're so scared to put our head up above water because we don't want to get stamped or trampled or embarrassed, or sort of. And embarrassment is such a overpowering emotion, where one incident, like, oh, what happened? That disabled guy needed help. It just sort of, till date, I'm now talk about it on stage. I'm a stand-up comedian who makes fun of myself. It's in some cases self-deprecating. In some cases, I talk about experience where people are laughing at the other people who made a fool of themselves by putting me down. And I'm in a much more comfortable place talking about it, like we are sharing stories. But still, when someone's like, what happened, that blind fool, what happened, or what happened, he's blind, maybe not intentionally to hurt, but when I hear that, it just sort of still has such a deep-seated effect, in my body. It kind of just sends me into that old primal feeling of not good enough,
Mm-hmm.
And
So
it's
true.
terrifying that it still happens. But what I tell some people, right, and I do a joke about it, I'm like, you know what, you can still sit there on the side of the road saying, oh, is he visually impaired? Is he blind? Is he a person who's got a visual impairment? Is he alter abled? I'm like, instead of that, calling and getting the right name, why don't you help him cross the road? Because that's more important at this point in time. And I,
Exactly.
everyone's just
And
shouting out, and I've got no experience with a disabled friend who's got cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, ever taking offense with the wrong pronoun or the wrong label or the wrong political correct term. It's usually people getting offended on behalf of a person with a disability, and I find that absolutely astonishing.
it's so true. And I think so many times what prevents people from being inclusive is they stumble on words and action. And as you said, you just want to get across the street. So let's
Yeah,
get to the point and
yeah,
not be so hesitant about offending by using the wrong term. That's
yeah.
why if you address someone by their name, you get to know them, then you'll start to slowly understand how they prefer to be addressed.
Yeah, because I think we diminish a person's entire work. Entire. I mean, you have one of the things that you have in your life is dwarfism, but there are so many things that go into making who you are, making you into who you are, and I don't undermine that by just calling you by one label, and I think that's unfair to you, right? And I think that's a beautiful point, because I think we take away from so many aspects of humanity and a human being by just reducing them to a label or a pronoun or whatever it may be. And maybe some people like it, but I don't think there should be too much focus on that. And I'm so glad you said it, because I think it needs to be said. Because if I do call you the wrong thing, instead of calling you a little person or a person with dwarfism, I call you, say, I don't even know if it's accepted if I call you, if the word midget is used, I don't think you're going to go and scold me. You'll say, hey, that's not what is used anymore, right?
That's exactly what I'll say.
Yeah, yeah, because I don't know, and I'm not interacting with people with dwarfism on a regular basis for me to know. But you wouldn't, go to the other extreme and say, I'm off this podcast no longer. I hope you don't say that. I'm just assuming.
No. But I would say, especially in the comedy world, that I spent some time in my career working at a talent agency representing comedians, so I know that world very well.
Uh-huh.
You probably will come across people with dwarfism that are okay with the term midget. So
Hmm.
it's very tricky because a
Yeah,
majority of us prefer not to use it, but you
yeah,
may have a lived experience where you come across people who are okay with it, and then that makes some of us feel like we're going backwards, but
Yeah.
it's
No, it's so strange because I do have a story in comedy. Yeah, because I met a guy and he said, "Call me a midget," and I said, "Okay, now if I do the story on stage," he said, "Do it because it's my story about you and me." I said, "But what?" He's like, "No, it's about you and me. So talk about us, not about the community of people." So I get what you mean, but it's also a case to case situation, right? Because
exactly.
when I thought of dwarfs, for me automatically it's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which of course is
Hmm.
popular culture. And is Walt Disney wrong? In many ways, Walt Disney and the stories that he propagated were very wrong. But in fact, when you said you wrote and said I'm a person who lives with dwarfism, I'm like, can I call her a dwarf on the podcast? So it's and this is you and I who both identify as people with a disability. We're both having this conversation. I'm still unsure. Yeah. So the thing is, there are certain ways that we were just told to use words so loosely, and I think that's good that we are aware that certain words, and I think it's a person to person situation, right? There are things that you might get upset, and a person who might not have any disability doesn't like certain other words. So I think conversations are really important. But through your work and through the talks you gave and the people you are bringing into your sort of story, do you see a change one-on-one happening?
Absolutely. I think there is change once people become more aware and knowledgeable about our community. There's a higher level of respect and understanding that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
I know we were talking about kind of the word dwarf and the historical reference of
Mm-hmm.
being fictional characters. For
Right.
me, I believe that it's okay to use the word dwarf or dwarfism because that is the medical diagnosis per
Okay.
se.
Right.
And I'm okay with little person, but in the disability community, you'll hear a lot of people say people first or identity first language. So people first language would be person with dwarfism. Identity first would be little person
Oh,
or
I didn't see.
dwarf.
I didn't even know these things existed. I didn't know people first, identity first terminology. Ah, interesting.
And I think I confuse people because I tell them that I'm okay with either term. I
Hmm.
think I like to give people as many options as possible
Right.
for me because then we can move on and have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But those who get kind of caught up on what to use or what not to use prevents them from getting to the meat of understanding that we, at the end of the day, are all just human
Yeah.
and don't really need the labels. But until the world gets to a place where there's greater levels of inclusion, we're going to
Mm.
still need them.
So do you physically like now? I'd love to know how your husband and you met, and now you are a family with a little boy who's 3 months old. So when you travel, or maybe we can talk about how you met first, and then go into like, as a family, when you move around, how is it? How is it for you? Is it easy? Is it a lot of accommodation? Do you get a lot of stairs? And do you get? I mean, what I'm talking about is how is it? How is the experience being a family with your partner and your child, being in the world out at large, and also now with the previous year's lockdown? How was it for you to cope?
I would say the lockdown, even since we've had our child, we haven't gone out too much just because of
Okay,
trying to be safe. But as a couple in the past, going out places, definitely people are more likely to laugh, stare, point.
really?
In major cities, it happens more because you're seeing so many more people in any given day. In
Mm.
small towns, it's not going to happen as much, but there may be some people in those small towns who have had little to no exposure to diversity. And then that makes them more likely to make comments and judge.
So is that more from that's more from ignorance as opposed to malice, right?
Exactly.
That still
And
hurts. I don't think it hurts less, but
exactly. It
that's
really
terrible
is.
that people do that. I mean, I know it's done in, like, as you mentioned, historically, and there are, of course, it's a question which I have to ask you, but the Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister, and that
Mhm.
sort of feature in popular culture now. But you read it in books, right? The dwarf or being the court jester, or the dwarf being, oh. And it happens, of course, in Game of Thrones, the dwarfs mounting the dog and the pig and having the joust and everyone laughing. And yeah, you're like, oh, cool, that was in medieval times, maybe during the reign of Richard III or whatever. but it still happens that people laugh at and they point, and I mean, I just can't. Sometimes I can't see people, so I just give them the benefit of the doubt, saying that, you know, they may be not looking at me, or they're not looking at the fact that I use a cane. So I give people, but sometimes I get angry that, but I can't believe that they still do that. It's, you know, or it's ridiculous,
It's
hurtful.
not fun.
Yeah,
But in most cases, I tend to ignore people because I'm worried about my own physical safety. So if
yeah.
I respond and act back, that could lead to more tension, and I just can't.
No, but I think you have as much, if not more, of a right to demand dignity. And in the sense, you're living such a full life with your partner and
Mhm.
with your husband, with your child. I just don't get it. I don't get what people see in themselves that gives them that feeling that, hey, you know, look at me, I have it all. Let me make someone else feel not good enough. And I'm not talking about you and me specific, just that general sense. And I mean, maybe the word now is used as entitlement or privilege, but that feeling that I am going to make someone feel not good enough. I just hate that feeling
Mhm.
that they have, you
Mhm.
know.
And that's what I think when I ignore the
Mm.
comments, because I hear most of them,
Yeah.
I think that may cause someone to rethink a little as well, because I'm ignoring it. It's not affecting me. They were hoping it would affect me.
Mm.
If they have a friend around, their friend may stick up for me and say, why would you do that?
Mm.
And it really hopefully causes someone to reflect and not do it again.
And I've noticed, you know, I think we can all hope that there is someone in their group or someone saying, why would you do that? Right? Not like you fool, you can't say that, but why would you do that? It's such an important question, right? Because, and our hope
Mhm.
is that they introspect, going, why would I do that? But I think many of these times when people say these things, I feel personally, and I could be completely off, my gauge could be off people. I feel it comes from a place of self. They don't like themselves. So they feel, if I'm miserable, why
Mhm.
is a disabled person happy? You know?
Right?
Yeah.
It's could be very true.
Yeah. No, but did the whole thing, and I don't know if it's a question worth answering for on your thing, but did the whole Game of Thrones Tyrion Lannister, because he was such a hit in the show, did it help for your awareness or image? Did people get more curious? Did they start asking questions, or was it just another thing which just passed by?
I think the best thing about it is the way that the world now looks at Peter Dinklage as
Hmm.
an extremely talented actor,
Hmm.
and his dwarfism is just a part of who he is, but it's
Hmm.
not necessarily talked about. And I
Hmm.
think that's what everyone really wants at the end of the day,
Yeah.
to be admired for their skill set. Their disability brings traits
Hmm.
to their humanity, and allows them to do things in certain ways,
Hmm.
but it's being acknowledged for your skill set and passion above
Hmm.
else. And that just happens to be a part of who you are. And I
Yeah.
think it has worked so well as his career has blown up, especially from the recognition through Game of Thrones. I
Yeah.
think the world has kind of identified that it is a fictional show, and that we aren't really gonna, no one's gonna treat us
Yeah.
kind of the way related to that. I think there's
Yeah.
probably more impact on the reality television shows that happen
Hmm.
around us, because they're a lot less budget, less thought being put
Hmm.
into them, trying to figure out what people may or may not like.
Hmm.
I think I am more likely to have society attach me to one of those versus a fictional show that everyone loved.
Absolutely. No, when I read the book Game of Thrones, I that was one of my characters who I loved. I mean, I salute George R. R. Martin for writing that character so well, because you would obviously, you know, you would, in my case, listen to the book from his perspective, and what a deep character, right? Like, with, he's got malice, he's got love, and he's loyal to a flaw. He's got these human traits which you would want, at the same time you would envy in even an able, not, you know, not a person with, not a dwarf, but in any person you would sometimes salute that the brain, the ability to think through strategy, such a thing. But just this one thing, sometimes, like the way his father looks at him, the way people mock him, but he still ends up being massive in the plot of the Game of Thrones. And I find that tremendously respectable as a character, right? Of course, he's human, and I could identify with, so not the greatness, but I could identify with a lot of traits. Like, he would mess up as a normal person, not because he was a dwarf, but he did other things which are stupid, and I found that so amazing, that character. And I watched a couple of movies in the past with Peter Dinklage. I think one was a show called Nip Tuck back in the day, where he was this, where I think it was a plastic surgeon office in Florida, and he was the guy who the wife had an affair with, and I was like, this guy's really cool. And then again in a movie called Death at a Funeral, and he again, and he's got such a and this thing, as in, I can't see his size and his entire sort of acting, but I can hear his voice, and he's quite a compelling person on screen just to listen to, so it's amazing, as you mentioned, that he can bring that out in his acting skills, as opposed to just playing the dwarf roles.
And that's the best thing. And I think in the acting world, a lot of people with disabilities who also happen to be actors or creators want those types of roles where it's not talked about and they can just shine and be a doctor or a professional or a fictional character, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And if they're not given that chance, it prevents them from being able to thrive.
So Becky, you mentioned that you're a motivational speaker. So what else do you do to spend your time, and your husband and you? What do you both do?
I think I did forget to answer earlier about how we did meet. We did end up meeting through Facebook. We had some mutual friends, and we did long distance dating for a while, and then finally met after about 4 months of talking.
So where was he at that time? You were in Massachusetts. He was in.
I was actually in New York City.
Okay.
I've been around a little bit in my adult life, so I was living in New York City, and he was living in Wisconsin, where he was from.
Okay.
We did long distance for 2 years.
Oh, that must have been tough. Yeah.
And then I moved to Wisconsin for a little bit, for about 2 years, and then we moved to Massachusetts about a year ago.
Okay.
And so it's just common for people to meet long distance, and because you're not necessarily going to find someone with dwarfism who you're compatible with in your local area.
Right. So you've been together now for a few years, right?
Yes. So in our free time, I would say we've been pretty busy just trying to. Our son actually is on supplemental oxygen for sleep apnea. Okay. And we were kind of talking about how we get around, and it's been challenging because right now he uses a car bed instead of a car seat.
Okay, because you need to have the tank, the machine. Right.
So it just makes it a little more challenging to leave the house, and especially since we're still in this pandemic, we have been spending a lot of time at home, but trying to find some cheer recently with the holiday season coming up. We started decorating for the holidays, and I still do a lot of virtual speeches and work virtually. I just recently started that up again because I was taking time off with our son.
Yeah.
But it really has been kind of just staying busy, keeping him fed and getting him to sleep when he needs to sleep. And
how cool is that? I mean, it must be
hopefully
beautiful.
We can start to kind of take some more walks and enjoy the water. We do live in a town very close to the water, and I always find it very therapeutic. And I love taking photos wherever I am. So if I can go places where there are good photographs to take, I always enjoy that.
It's amazing that. So do you? So the three of you are at home and you do your thing, and it's amazing because I just such a great amount of things you're doing, and I'm just so. I usually talk too much, but I'm kind of out of words. That I'm so glad that you reached out and you're doing all this, and you have a lovely child and your partner who you can share your life with. And thank you for getting on this podcast to share your story. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So where can Becky, where can people find you? Where can they follow you on social media, or see the photos you take, or hear your speeches, the talks you've given? Can you just drop a couple of things and I can put them in the description later?
Yeah, so BeckyMotivates.com is where my website is, and a lot of my social handles are related to that: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, under Becky Kekula. Okay. But all of those can be linked from BeckyMotivates.com.
Brilliant. So I'll make sure, and I hope all the people listening right now head over to your website, check out everything you have to talk about and the stories you've shared. And again, on behalf of everyone, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Good luck and all the best to your little boy, and hope he grows up to be happy and as cool as his mom.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.